Imagine a ruler so powerful he compared himself to the sun, a king whose armies shook Europe, whose palace became the very symbol of royal grandeur, and whose word was law, even when it clashed with Rome itself. This is the story of Louis XIV, the Sun King of France. In this chapter, we witness his relentless wars, the rise of Versailles as the jewel of his reign, and his fierce conflict with the Pope, a battle that revealed not just his strength, but also his vulnerabilities. France ascends. It is the mid-1660s. Louis XIV is no longer the boy king guided by Mazarin. He is now a man strong, ambitious, determined to carve his name into history. France is thriving. Its population is growing, its wealth expanding, and its culture blossoming. But for Louis, this is not enough. France must not simply prosper. France must dominate, and he, Louis, must be the center of it all. He looks at his rivals, the Spanish, Habsburgs, the Dutch Republic, the Holy Roman Empire. Each of them stands in his way. For Louis XIV, there's only one solution: war. The First Wars, Louis's first major test, came with the War of Devolution, 1667-1668. Spain was weak. King Charles II, frail and sickly. Louis seized the moment, claiming rights to parts of the Spanish Netherlands through his wife, Maria Theresa of Spain. The French army stormed into Flanders with speed and power. Cities fell, fortresses surrendered. Europe trembled at the sight of France's strength, but victory was not absolute. Triple alliance of England, Sweden, and the Dutch Republic forced Louis to halt his ambitions. He was humiliated, forced to return much of what he conquered. Yet the Sun King learned a valuable lesson. Diplomacy could halt his armies, but it could not break his will. Louis began to prepare for something greater, something that would shake all of Europe: the Franco-Dutch War. The Franco-Dutch War, 1672-1678 and 1672. Louis XIV unleashed one of the most dramatic campaigns of his reign. The Dutch Republic, a small but wealthy and powerful state, had long been a thorn in his side. They were traders, merchants, and naval masters, and worst of all, they had helped form alliances against him. Louis would break them. The French armies, well-trained and brilliantly led, marched into the Netherlands. At first, success seemed inevitable. City after city fell. The Dutch were desperate, but in a brilliant act of defense, the Dutch opened their dikes, flooding their own lands to halt the French advance. What had seemed like an easy conquest turned into a long and bloody war. England, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire all joined the Dutch against Louis. Europe had united to resist the Sun King. The war dragged on for years, draining France's treasury and costing countless lives. Finally, in 1678, the Treaty of Nijmegen ended the war. Louis gained territory, including Franche-Comté and parts of Flanders, but at great cost. His armies had shown their strength. His enemies had shown their unity, and Louis himself had shown Europe that he would stop at nothing to achieve glory. The birth of Versailles, while wars raged abroad. Another battle was being fought at home, not with swords, but with architecture, wealth, and spectacle. Versailles. What began as a modest hunting lodge outside Paris would be transformed into the most magnificent palace the world had ever seen. For Louis XIV, Versailles was not simply a home. It was a statement. Every gilded wall, every mirror, every fountain declared, the Sun King rules here. Nobles who once conspired in Paris were now drawn into the orbit of Versailles. To see the king, to gain his favor, they had to live at court, where every detail of life was controlled by Louis. The palace was a theater, and Louis was both director and star. His rising in the morning, his meals, his walks in the gardens, all became rituals of power. At Versailles, Louis turned politics into performance. He was no longer just a king. He was the sun around which all of France revolved. The cost of glory, but glory came at a price. Versailles devoured money. The fountains required entire rivers to be diverted. The gardens demanded thousands of workers. The endless ceremonies consumed fortunes. Meanwhile, France's wars drained its treasury even further. Taxes rose. Ordinary people suffered. Yet Louis pressed on. For him, Versailles and war were not luxuries. They were necessities. They showed the world that France was supreme and that he was untouchable. But there was one power he could not ignore: the Church. Conflict with Rome. Louis XIV was a devout Catholic. He was also a king who tolerated no rival authority. The Pope claimed influence over bishops and churches in France. Louis would not allow it. In the 1670s and 1680s, tensions flared. Louis insisted that he, not the Pope, had the right to appoint bishops in his kingdom. He expanded what were known as the Gallican liberties, the idea that the French Church was independent of Rome's direct control. This angered Pope Innocent XI. Letters flew back and forth. Threats were made. At one point, the Pope even refused to approve bishops chosen by Louis. For Louis, this was unacceptable. He pushed harder, asserting his authority, even at the risk of excommunication. It was a dangerous game, the most powerful Catholic king in Europe, in open defiance of the Pope. Though a full rupture was avoided, the conflict revealed Louis's true character. Even in matters of faith, where kings usually bowed to Rome, Louis XIV stood firm. His crown, his authority, his will, these came above all else. The human side amidst all this grandeur and conflict. Louis XIV was still a man. He suffered from illnesses, painful problems with his legs, fevers, and eventually a terrible disease that would torment him in later life. He was plagued by fears of betrayal, haunted by the cost of endless wars, and yet he pressed on. Every morning at Versailles, he rose to perform his role as the Sun King. To his people, he was dazzling, almost godlike. But behind the gold and glory was a man carrying the heavy burden of power. The legacy so far by the end of the 1670s? Louis XIV stood as the most powerful monarch in Europe. His wars had reshaped borders. Versailles had become the center of culture, politics, and art. His defiance of Rome had shown that he was not only a king, but a sovereign unlike any other. But this was only the beginning. Greater wars, deeper struggles, and the twilight of his reign still lay ahead. Louis XIV had built a world around himself, a world where the sun never set. But how long could even the Sun King shine? The story of Louis XIV is far from over. In the next chapter, we will witness his later wars, the height of his power, the cracks that began to appear in the golden facade of Versailles. For now, remember this: Louis XIV was not just a king, he was an idea. An idea that the power of one man could reshape a nation, a continent, and even history itself.